Welcome to Meet the Makers. I'm Julie Smithson, co-founder of Metaverse, co-founder of XR Women, and host of the Polly's WebXR Awards. Our team brought you the WebXR Summit Series and Meta Traversal Initiative, and now Meet the Makers, featuring world builder Artsy Marie, WebXR engineer Ben Ferns, producer and prompt engineer Ivo Heyning, and also the team that pulled off the first Volumetric award show broadcast at this year's Polly's, live from Zero Space in Brooklyn, with the collaboration between Scatter and Cause and Christie that broke new ground. And we'll hear how they pulled it off. To introduce our first interview with Artsy Marie, welcome my good friend, Karen Alexander.
Thank you, Julie. Artsy Marie has a great personal story to tell about how she became an accomplished world builder. Hailing from my own home state of Kentucky, she was born and raised with a zest for art and a talent for photography. Her empowering digital images of the divine feminine, displayed in galleries in alt space and virtual Burning Man, wowed the community. Meet Artsy telling her story.
I always tell people that I was born with a paintbrush in my hand because I've been an artist since I was born. My mom is the lead artist in the family. She's the one that inspired me as a kid to create. And I would create every single day. There's not a day that goes by that I don't feel the urge to create something. When my mom first got a Palm Pilot, I used to play with her Palm Pilot in church, and I would draw mainly people because I also have a passion for humanity. When I got my first laptop, my dad told me not to use it for gaming or silly things, but to use it for betterment of my education and to make things happen. Technology and art is what I'm about. When I was a junior in high school, I discovered my love for photography. And that's when I started my business, Stacy Marie Photography, here in Kentucky. And I had booked my first wedding at the age of 17. So I started entrepreneurship really early. Had a love for VR since I first tried it in 2016. I was spending hours upon hours just talking to people and meeting people and networking. And I was even selling my art through this art gallery. And that inspired me to look a little bit deeper into what was happening in alt space. One night that I'd spent traveling to different parties and catching the vibe, the next morning I looked online to find an Oculus Quest. They said that they had one left at my local Walmart. Went to the store and they were trying to find that last device. I suggested that maybe I could get the one in the display case. After managers shuffling back and forth, they actually let me take home the one that was in the display case. So I got the very last one, and the rest is history. I created an entire body of work of beautiful images of Black women, both imaginary and a mix of the women that I know in my life. And I wanted to capture them in a way that shows their true spiritual essence and their power, their inner divine femininity. And so I took myself to a place where I really felt loved. And so I pulled in all of that love that I felt. And then I sent that love to every corner of the universe that I could imagine. Just maybe a month or two after I'd done this meditation, that's when I walked on to Playa and became part of the Burning Man experience inside of All Space. Greg Edwards, which is the designer of the Playa for Burning Man, he took notice very early in my career that I was going to be a force to be reckoned with. And so I remember, being incredibly enamored by how large scale and true to life the Burning Man Playa was. It was the first time I felt really energized by the community and what was possible. And from an art perspective, everything was amazing to me. And they had just realized that Burning Man was going to be canceled because of the pandemic. And so they were looking for creatives to help other Burning Man creatives bring their 3D artwork into VR to be placed on Playa. And so I signed up for that, and they gave me 4 Black artists that I was able to work with and bring their vision into virtual reality. And that's when I really felt my first sense of community in VR. After experiencing Burning Man for the first time in 2020, and I felt rejuvenated, I felt free, I felt liberated. People were asking me to make things for them, and so I was turning that into a business. Past this, I had started building everything from scratch on a world building journey, and turning it into an empire. I've designed over 250 designs. I'm approaching 300 this year, and it's changed my life for the better. And for me, it all started with this image right here. I was not doing well financially when I first was starting to, when I was first starting this journey. But I bet on myself, and I spent $300 to download SketchUp Pro. So that's when I built my first penthouse. And within 30 minutes of bringing in the penthouse and hanging out in it, I got my very first client. He was like, "How much for you to build my dream home?" And I said, $300. I went on to build over 250 environments, had gathered over 200 supporters on my Patreon, and I would give them a new template every single month. And they were able to create over 6,000 worlds in Altspace. I would build my architecture from scratch in Blender, but then I also transferred over into creating all of my interior decorations from scratch as well. And that's when I built a huge library of content that I could use. I'll never forget all of the experiences that I've had inside of Altspace, and I think the community feels the exact same way. One of the key factors for me in crafting all of these worlds was I want to experience luxury in a way that I haven't experienced before. And so a lot of my spaces after my art gallery were definitely that luxurious feeling, being able to hop on a plane or hop on a private jet and travel to distant parts of the universe. Blender has so many different. It's limitless what you can create inside of Blender, but you're presented with this default cube at startup. And it's very difficult sometimes to imagine the possibilities. And for me, coming from The Sims, like we always had a plot of land, where like you pick out the plot specifically in the location, and then you build on top of that. And then you have, your repository of shapes and, textures and furniture. And so that's what I've created using Blender, is that I have an entire library that of textures and materials that I've curated over the past 2 years on my journey. Encourage people to create these scenes, these startup files where you can just have fun right here as soon as you open Blender. For me, that was one of my biggest hurdles I had to overcome with learning Blender, is that if I start from a place where I am familiar, which is playing The Sims, then I can get to that top level of creativity by, having a foundation there for me. Blender, you have, a real time shading view. And so you're able to see the light that comes through the windows and you're able to see the shadows in the corners. And so that really helps me frame, it gives me a frame of reference for the realism that I might see once I get it into one of the metaverse platforms. I started with this wood texture because I wanted things to feel warm. I have the emissive lights because I think uplighting makes things look sophisticated and expensive. In VR, we have the ability to use textures, materials, and lighting that would be too expensive to replicate in real life. And so I use as much of these different components as I can because it's limitless what I can do with it. The very first tech summit at Essence Fest, I built out the render in Blender, and they actually built it in real life. So I really love Blender now. It's my best friend. I work in it every single day. My absolute favorite AI tool right now is Midjourney, and I've been on Midjourney since they first came out. I'm an early supporter of their platform. And as artists, it's important that you have reference. And so for me, like when I'm looking at these AI images, I'm looking for, like the composition of these blocks. Like now it's easy for me to break this down. I'm also a part of the Bureau of Creative Intelligence, and one of our projects is working with the Thurgood Marshall College Fund. The Thurgood Marshall College Fund has created a program called the Meta Scholars Program, and they're helping other young kids get into the Web3 space. And I feel honored to work with such a team of people that are focused on the younger generation and making sure that they don't get left behind, making sure they're properly equipped with all the technology and knowledge that they need to succeed in Web3. I think the most important part of my journey for me is the fact that I can now give back to my family for creating me the way that I am. For the very first time, me, my mom, and my sister, we will be traveling to Korea. My mom is from Korea. She was born in Korea. She was adopted at a very young age and brought to the States. And this will be her first time back home. And, it wouldn't be something that I was able to do for them if I haven't gone through this journey.
Wow, Karen, wasn't that inspiring? We're so impressed by Artsy and all that she's accomplished. I can't wait to see what she's working on now.
Indeed, Julie. Her talent and intrepid entrepreneurial spirit is an inspiration to the whole community. Sophia is here to introduce Ben Ferns. So I will see you all later. Bye-bye.
Hi, Karen. Spatial Fusion won Experience of the Year and AR Pass-Through Experience of the Year at the Polys. And next up, Sophia's joining us. Hey, Sophia. Tell us more about Ben, Sophia.
Yes, Ben Ferns is the founder of Variant. He worked with Foria and Spatial Fusion team, which was a collaboration with Lusion, Meta, and Zelling Sound to produce that groundbreaking experience. We think his work and story deserves a deeper dive about this Australian engineer and entrepreneur who is out on the bleeding edge of mixed reality on the web. Meet Ben Ferns.
I kind of joke with friends that view source, right-click view source taught me more than my university degree and was considerably cheaper as well. And I started a multimedia agency with my brothers. We ran that for a few years. I ended up kind of running it solo for the last few years. It taught me a lot about business. The name of the company ended up being Metaverse Makeovers, which now sounds kind of groan-worthy, but back then Metaverse was kind of a dead word. Obviously it'd been in the book, but it kind of had fallen by the wayside like a lot of 90s kind of cyberpunk speculative fiction. And we were keen to bring it back. So we started this company called Metaverse Makeovers. We targeted the Chinese female mobile market because it had this really interesting intersection of social media use and nail art and kind of this growing sense of digital identity. Obviously, social media was a thing in 2010 already, but this concept of it reaching out into other aspects of your life and having a digital identity was still kind of fresh and new and interesting to explore. We got funded. We raised funding from a few different sources. And I think at that time we were the top funded AR startup in Australia, which in retrospect isn't saying much because we were probably the only AR startup in Australia. So I needed to look beyond where we were and what was going to come up next. And that was where WebXR kind of came in for the first time. So we started actually redesigning our stack around the concept of all of our content was going to be living on the web, all the code was going to be living on the web. And basically we'd have a thin layer in our app that would take all this JavaScript and take all the GLTFs, which we settled on for a format as well. We were using FBX before that. And act as a kind of fake web AR layer to enable all this content to drive. The specs were very early at that point, so we kind of invented our own, but we made sure it was going to be compatible with whatever web AR and then WebXR turned into, so that when the day came, we could kind of flip a switch and all of our customers would suddenly be told, hey, you don't need to have users download an app anymore. You can distribute it on browser. I met up with another artist called Tia Bauman. She had a concept of nail art being something that could be kind of expanded in this way of adding digital elements. We joined up and did a few art installations where we were basically giving people manicures and sticking nails on and then having AR come off the nails, and talking about a physical product, which is stick-on nails, that we would be selling, and then an app that users downloads to view the bloom on their nail and customize it and then share it to a social network that's specifically built around this app. When we put it in front of people, they lost their mind. Well, specifically girls who were into nails lost their mind. It was always one extreme or the other reaction, which I kind of liked. I like that as someone who designs products. It's like, if you get into a room and someone just goes, yeah, okay. But then like 20% of people, 10% of people kind of go, oh my God, what is this? Can I keep this? And I thought there was an interesting opportunity for augmented reality as a whole to have an impact, because all of a sudden, a whole bunch of retail spaces were closed. A whole bunch of people were left thinking, well, how are we going to do the things we used to do every day in a different way? And so I thought I would build something that helps people to get into the AR world, basically, to dip their toes into, to take those first few steps. So I built Variant, which is an API that lets you generate 3D models on demand. And basically you feed in a list of, I want a chair with this material and this kind of legs, and the metal on the frame should be this kind, and I want the large version. Or I want the version I want a back that's 52 centimeters tall. The things that excited me about AR right at the beginning, before I had really seen the modern version of it, mobile AR, they still excite me about AR, and I think they still excite other people, guessing by, I started with it as a concept of extending a digital identity, magnifying who you actually are. I wanted to jump right into that future, that cyberpunk future of glittering things around people, and I was doing writing about, what happens post scarcity in terms of fashion. Gold and diamonds and all these things don't mean much, and even the new forms of exclusivity, which is about identifying trends early and wearing the right labels and stuff, even those fade a little bit. Those ideas in that world were so interesting to me that it made me change my career. The world I got into was the world of, well, XR needs to make money, and where can it make money? Where can it be useful right now? Where can it provide enough value for people? And then there was the bit that we focused on at Plateau, which is utility. basically, I need to do this one thing, and if XR is the best way to do it, then that's how we're going to do it. I need to know that this washing machine is going to fit in the gap that I've got in between my fridge and the wall. If there's a button on a website that says, hey, this will let you do it, you'll definitely do it. That was the one we doubled down on with Platter, because it matched an equivalent need on the other side of the company, which is companies that were struggling to sell things over the internet that they would normally want retail space for. So it was a nice match, and it worked relatively well. I mean, now you see the kind of the market research numbers, which I always doubted, of 150% increase in conversions because they allowed AR previews on their e-commerce store. And I was always very skeptical of that. But when I got access to some of those numbers from a company that I helped out with Variant, and it was 200%, and it was a big company, so it was not like a one-off spike or something. I was like, oh, okay, this is that one is very, very real, and that is something that will drive this forwards. Just because ROI is such a return on investment is such a driving factor in a company, it's impossible to double it and double conversion and ignore the factors that cause that. Also, companies have got a utility thing for themselves in terms of, if this turns out to be the best way to train people, is to put them in VR, drops accidents by 30%, drops lawsuits by X%, they will do it because it's so results based. And there is enough stuff like that in XR. Training on VR is huge. It makes a massive difference in so many different areas. Ultimately, computers are still just 2D screens, and we do a lot of work out in the real world in 3 dimensions. And for that, XR is always better. I'm really excited to see what happens when it becomes the native way of building 3D content for kind of more creative, expressive 3D content creation. I'm really excited to see how VR is going to impact that over a decade or more. I think it will help democratize things if things are a bit more physical, and we get a little bit of AI in there to get rid of things like worrying about UV mapping and topology and things like that. It really excites people the first time they learn that they can build something in VR or AR, and they do it and they see it. It's the ultimate form of coding where you kind of feel like a bit of a wizard because you've taken something from your mind and made it real, except this is real enough to almost trick you. It's pretty compelling, and I think that the level of passion that exists in people who are building XR tools and building XR experiences and businesses and things like that will keep it rolling through any kind of lull that may happen because the technology isn't quite there yet.
That was refreshing, honest, and insightful. There is so much developer talent out there that comes from similar origins as Ben, but they haven't quite found their way into 3D yet.
So true. And that's what we hope by sharing these stories, that more talents like him will emerge. There are 13 million JavaScript developers out there, and only a tiny fraction of them are working in spatial computing. And that's not even including all of the developers out there starting to code using AI, which brings us to our next maker, our community honoree at this year's Poly's, Ivo Heyning.
Thanks, Sophia.
Thanks, Julie.
If you aren't familiar with the term prompt engineering, just ask an AI to explain it to you. Seriously, it's a thing now, as you've likely heard. Ivo Heyning is an accomplished producer who has contributed generously to the discourse in our community around ethics with the XR Guild, also around cooperation on standards with OMI, the Open Metaverse Interoperability Group, and leading the Meta-Traversal Initiative advocating for portal interoperability across platforms. She's the author of the book Prompt Craft and founder of the Reality Craft Studio. Ivo is both a student and teacher of the AI game, practicing the craft of seeding and refining prompts to generate text, images, music, and video. You know where all of this is going. We're already seeing generative AI building immersive spaces, and it will accelerate the evolution of the metaverse itself. In our next segment, meet Ivo Heyning, producer and prompt engineer, sharing her story.
I began my creative path in immersive worlds, XR, virtual spaces in the 90s. I had been a coder all the way back to being a 6-year-old and also an artist. So when I became a creative technologist, it was in the context of working in nonprofit organizations. And so I started in interactive media to fundraise, to raise $1 million to solve a problem, to build a bear sanctuary. We made the first online charity auction with eBay. We convinced eBay to do it, and then we raised money and built a bear sanctuary. After 9/11, I quit my broadcast media job and I went to teach. And it was around that time that I got very engaged with social impact networks, and specifically early sustainability movements and these sort of change agent groups. And one of those groups invited me, it was through a group called the Omidyar Network, to participate in Second Life, and specifically to create there in terms of something we called the Better World Island. So that was my first jump into virtual spaces, creating virtual worlds for education, for telling difficult stories. I liked creating spaces that you couldn't get to in the physical world. We started creating experiences that reflected the difficult stories of people in displacement camps. For example, those leaving the Sudan who were currently living in displacement camps, telling their own stories through immersive spaces. I could see how this was a rich space for nonprofits to work together. So I found the folks at TechSoup and a woman named Beth Cantor and a few of my other sort of nonprofit changemaker friends. And the Nonprofit Commons created official virtual office spaces for hundreds of nonprofit organizations to collaborate and work together and meet together on a regular basis. And this was the beginning of a place for representation, for example, for the Transgender Resource Center to provide support services. Communities, for example, Native American diaspora, creating ritual spaces and places that were a place to gather for those who were no longer on their tribal lands. We began looking at how do you connect the community layer with the local, the national, and the international layers. Now, most people haven't had the opportunity yet to think about all of those connection points as part of a connected whole, right? We had some goofy language for this in the 90s, right? Like cyberspace. But the metaverse became one of those terms that helped encompass what that digital space could be. It's not a perfect word, obviously, but it helps people understand that the future of our 3D and 4D interconnected world is both digital and it connects to the physical. It is interactive, but it is also transactive. It includes all of the things that we engage with in our daily lives. Some of those are around creating consistency. Some of those are around creating embodiment. For example, having a beautiful avatar that people recognize when you go into a space, so that I know every time I see you, you're the one in the shiniest coat in the room because I know you. I know that that's your character. And I'm writing a book right now. The second in the Reality Craft series is specifically focused on those creative capacities to create the worlds we want to see in the future. Right? So thinking about the futures we want, not just the futures that have been told to us, right? The dystopian ideas and all of these kind of dark old stories that are boring. That is not the future we want. We have had a shortage of great imagination when it comes to positive futures. For example, with our relationships with AI, there are very few protopian stories about symbiosis with collective intelligences, AGI, and a wide variety of symbiotic intelligences that are already all around us. We just haven't figured out how to tell the right story around it. Figuring out how to unlock those doors and then provide keys to each other to say, here, let's pursue this path instead. If you think about where we've come in the web over the last 30 years, we've come a long way. We can work on real-time collaborative efforts together in both 2D and now in 3D. Where are we going to take that? How are we going to apply those skills? And what does it mean to do that wisely together? And so there was nowhere to have that conversation about ethical engagement, design choices that might leak out data in 3D, 4D, and out there into the world. So XR Guild was formed over the past year and a half. We are over a year in now, specifically to address not just the ethical inquiries, but how we do that inquiry process together, how we take that back into the boardroom and into the design process, but also how we engage our peers in asking questions about data and consent, research and development, figuring out whether a product choice is appropriate and whether it's something we should be putting out into the world. But also as something that we would now call generative, that would use the tools of AI along with participatory creation to build a world that is evolving in real time with the prompted ideas of the people in that space. If you think of nature, if you think of all of the different ways nature is aware and conscious of us in some way, that could look like many different forms of life. Trees, mycelial networks, animals, right? Each of these things has a different form of intelligence. We relate to each of them differently. And so too, our relationships with ANI, with narrow intelligences that, artificial is probably not the right word for, but these deep learning programs that we are now using as part of our creative toolkit, all of those tools are being assembled in real time together. We are all doing this massive participatory creative experiment. We are all sitting here sharpening our knives together to say, okay, I now want to be able to speak a sculpture. I want to speak a world into existence. So what does it mean to speak a world into existence, or to go straight from your imagination to something that can be potentially walked through and realized and made real for people? Right now, we're at our infancy, not just with immersive tools and the metaverse, but with generative tools. We're like in our playpens playing with these tiny little toys, and we know that our tiny little car is eventually going to drive us across the universe, but it's not going to get there anytime soon. And we are infants in this space. We're just figuring out how to use our tools effectively together. So I love creating communities that are valuable, meaningful, fun. I'm finishing up an album right now that's all generative lyrics combined with human music. We're working with amazing Grammy Award-winning musical artists combined with generative tools to create music videos that are fun and surreal and playful, and that are also a little bit bendy, right? We're bending the rules of reality a little bit. We're playing with the edges. And so I love creating in that space. I love inviting other people to create into that space. Even as I'm creating a music project, I'm creating a graphic novel based on those stories I wrote back in 2006. All of these pieces later on converge, and they converge in the immersive. What you're seeing here is a mix of generative video primarily from images that were created both from my existing artwork and using Midjourney, and then mixing those in tools such as Kyber and Runway, a handful of other tools used here. But in my generative media experiments, I've been running basically comparative tests in, I think, about 120 tools so far. For the music videos, I'll be using about a dozen of those. And then in the world building side, I've tested 4 or 5 different world building tools in addition to the 3D design tools. So eventually this will come together into a 3D concept album where the videos create one layer of the experience along with the immersive experience as well. So when you're thinking about how do these kinds of experiences come together, it often starts with an idea. In this case, the idea then went into both generative tools as I was refining the lyrics to the song. This particular song is about being stardust and how we are all connected, whether it's AI and digital or human or other forms of life. And so thinking about these big picture connections and how they change us, how they affect us, and what those relationships look like in our daily life. So what is the role of collaborative creativity in this space? It's figuring out how do we, you and I as human beings, choose to play together? How do we choose to interact in a way that is consent driven, that is appropriate for you and for me, that creates something maybe better than the sum of our parts, right? Maybe we are contributing to the betterment of society, or at least our little corner of it somehow. There's infinite ways those pro-social ideas, how do we care for each other? How do we create space for ritual, heritage, history, all of the things that are meaningful to us, right? The web is no longer something over there that we look at. The web is the thing that we're walking through and in, right? It's no longer a flat thing on a screen. It is the holographic experience. It is moving from 3D to 4D. And interoperability, the work of making sure that those connection points work for everyone, not just for me, not just for someone who happens to have a device like a VR headset or a lot of money and a good server, but for everyone. What does it take to create that open, level playing field where, just like the web works today, that it's an accessible space for collaboration, like a public commons, like a park? Open metaverse interoperability conversations, and even when we're doing experiments like metatraversal. And metatraversal is a movement toward interoperability that drives a very specific type of engagement and agreement. So we recognized pretty early on in the pandemic that there were certain promises of the metaverse that were not going to be realized, and certainly not realized by one company and one organization. When it comes to being able to move from one platform to another, that is often the work of larger groups like standards bodies. And so figuring out what are the connection points and how do we make those agreements together, that was the work that Metatraversal started. Over the last 2 years, we've gathered 7, 8 times now. We've put on a play together showing the movement between AR, VR, and XR on stage. But also, we've done these portal crawls, which have been a very interesting experiment for a group of people to move across the metaverse together. And if you're thinking about what the future of the 3D web looks like, it is these communities of people who learn to move together effectively. When all of these layers in the stack add up, when Metatraversal opens portals between web worlds the same way we click on a link today and we know it's going to take us to that other website, we know that those portals are beginning to open up doors between our worlds, that we do not have to be stuck to a single platform, a single walled garden, or a single perspective.
I just love seeing all this creativity unleashed, and Evo is right there on the vanguard of using these tools. Thank you so much, Evo. Next, Polly's director, Ginna Lambert, is joining us to introduce the next and final segment of this episode. Hey, Ginna.
Hey, Julie.
Great job directing the Pollies.
Thank you, Julie, for your fantastic work hosting. This group creates some great things together, don't we?
And that we do. And that's why we asked you to introduce our next and final story for this episode on the illustrious team that pulled off something pretty incredible, the first Volumetric Awards show broadcast. Tell us all about it, Ginna.
Thanks, Julie. Well, it was an honor and a delight to work with 3 specific groups on this first of its kind task. They came together like chefs in a kitchen at Scatter's headquarters, their R&D stage at Zero Space. And with the frenzy of a 48-hour film festival, they pulled off a monumental feat. It was amazing. We are grateful for their work and proud of their epic, groundbreaking results. From colorful animated portals to rigged camera fly-ins, this team demonstrated the power of volumetric video. Here to share their collaboration are Kaz, Christy, James, Corey, and Elena.
I'm James George, co-founder and CEO at Scatter, and we make a product called DepthKit, which is the world's most widely used tool for creating volumetric video human holograms.
Hi, so I'm Corey Allen. I am the lead technical producer at Scatter. My role is to continue our efforts in R&D and test our software against all of the wonderful and challenging use cases that people bring to us.
I'm Alana Peach. I'm a creative producer here at Zero Space, and I'm just really excited by all things 3D.
My name's Austin Kane, and I'm also known as Cause in the XR space. I am a photographer, commercially and professionally, for about 20 years now, and I have recently, in the last few years, started 3D modeling and doing more immersive design in the VR and XR spaces.
I'm Christy Finnison, and I'm an immersive storyteller, 3D artist, 360 videographer, and interactive simulation developer.
Before founding Scatter, I was an artist and computer scientist. I was the first artist in residence at Microsoft Research. I was the first to use volumetric video in an interactive documentary. The 0 Days VR, created by Scatter, was the first 6 Degrees of Freedom experience to win a News and Documentary Emmy. We've also been nominated for a second Emmy for our project just in 2021 called The Changing Same VR, which is about race in America.
So I loved digital media all throughout grade school, tinkering in Photoshop and all of the digital tools I could get my hands on. Went to school for cinematography and jumped into a career of film and television.
Originally, I started off in journalism, and I was at a journalism conference where Google News Lab did a session on this really cool thing called 360 video. And I just remember having the cardboard headset on and just looking around and thinking, wow, this is such an amazing storytelling tool. I was the marketing manager for the Glimpse Group, which is a VR AR investment company. And it was really fantastic working at Glimpse just because I got to see the wide use cases of AR and VR.
My first real foray into the space was through Altspace. I simply just wanted to make a video game at the time, but Altspace was a Unity-based platform and allowed me to take what I was already working on and move it into a VR space, which just opened up an entire new realm of design possibilities and even understanding of my own work.
I started my tech journey at UNC while I was still a student, working with things like ArcGIS and 3D modeling to plan and visualize sustainable spaces. Soon, I fell in love with the storytelling and learning aspect of 3D and then VR. I worked in various VR labs across campus, and my master's thesis project was the creation of a patient point of view VR simulation that placed learners into the patient's perspective during a trauma resuscitation, with the goal of improving understanding for the patient perspective, empathetic communication skills, and teamwork. I am passionate about creating experiences that expand perspectives to inspire action, and I enjoy bringing big picture concepts to life through that interplay of meaningful details and key touch points for people who are within the experience.
We're able to start to get at this notion of blending video game worlds and cinematic worlds and tell real dramatic or nonfiction stories featuring real people and real places in these virtual worlds and make them participatory, interactive, and shared social experiences. I believe that as we make breakthroughs in new technologies, there's always new ways of telling stories that are relevant to our current moment, because technology and the way we connect through it defines so much of how we understand the world and how we relate to one another.
And in 2016, when the folks at Scatter introduced me to the concept of volumetric video and telling cinematic stories in video games, I think something really resonated with me, where the people who were in this space were very intentional about doing something challenging and really living on the bleeding edge of technology in order to tell a story that was really important to them.
I remember when I went to go into Zero Space for my first tour, and I walked into the facilities and I just saw all of the tech that they had, from the virtual production stage to the motion capture stage to the large studio space. And I just thought, how could I say no to an opportunity like this, especially because my previous career had been focused on enterprise immersive technologies.
Being a photographer has helped in the space where, my eye for color and spatial design or spatial layouts have helped with the creation of worlds, being able to sort of feng shui the pathways, if you will.
And it was in alt space that I got to see firsthand a whole other layer to reality, seeing the true sense of community and connection that was living within social VR. And this opened my eyes to so many additional possibilities within the VR space.
You can see with both of our cameras right now, one of the clues that we build in that's very subtle is the idea of a drifting camera in virtual space that shows, being able to move the camera. I can spin it around. James is also spinning his camera around. I can just use this remote control in my hand to take full control of the camera. I can spin it around. I can change the environment around me. And now appear in this trippy, mushroom-filled, particle-filled 3D world. And as I spin around and maybe see that there's this crazy big frog right in front of me, I can even beam myself away to safety. And because we're in a video game, and I'm talking from a disembodied figure, teleport myself over to this log over here, where now I'm fully safe and away from the dangers of fire and gigantic frogs. So I bring all this up because this is our tool in action.
We have access to some of the most advanced production technologies in the world, and it's really amazing that we're not only able to work on really high-end client projects, but also focus on initiatives that give back to the community. And that's why we were super excited to be involved with this year's Poly Awards. We thought that it was absolutely groundbreaking to have an award show that involved the LED XR stage, involved volumetric capture, involved all the amazing creators that the Poly's team honored this year.
Our work with Ben Irwin in the past on the Polys Awards and in the Summit series that he's done, when he brought the third annual Polys to life in Zero Space in Brooklyn, New York, for a live experience, we were introduced to James George and Corey Allen from Scatter.
And the very talented team at Cause and Christie took one of their environments from AltSpace, adapted it for use in this kind of context, and we were able to seamlessly stream our volumetric assets into their virtual Unity world.
The coolest part about what we're doing is not that we're putting video into a digital world, but it's that we can then fly a camera around this video. We took the existing Polys world that we had built for AltSpace, and we used it as our environment and our stage for these volumetric presentations. And so during the show, we had Julie Smithson and Sophia Moshasha and a few others who would come into the cage and then have a guest come in as well, and they would interview them live volumetrically. Meanwhile, we took that little volumetric capture, put it into our world. We were able to direct Cinemachine cameras to fly around and move in and give a more realistic sense of 3D presence rather than just a flat video straight in front of you. It really helped sell the effect of them being in the world itself in a full volumetric way.
We had them show up in different parts of the world. Because it's volumetric, we wanted to show off how they really are, spatially present in the space, so that you could see that, this isn't just like a green screen. They are 3D in the space.
As people came on and off stage, rather than just kind of materializing out of thin air, out of little blocky pixels, he just hit a key on the keyboard and a little portal would pop up, and people could walk through it.
So right before the guest would step into the volumetric capture, thus appearing in the Unity world, we would open the portal, and the portal door would whoop, raise up right next to our host. So as they in the physical world walked into the stage, they essentially were walking out of this portal and onto the little stages that we had set up throughout the world. Then we'd bring the portal back up and they'd be like, oh, looks like it's time for me to go. See you later. And they'd walk through the portal and out of the 3D world.
It really helps tell the story and really gets people comfortable with the idea of, oh, this is what it means to be fully 3D in a virtual environment.
It was a wild ride. I think we had about 3 days to get in there really quickly. Thankfully, James and Corey were super helpful and very open to working with us and teaching us and getting us up to speed.
We got to learn from them as they were doing it, and really appreciated how hands-on they were with helping us get all those settings right.
One of the dreams for us that the Polys really was a step towards is the ability to actually be streaming the hologram, the volumetric video, into an interactive environment for the audience to then choose their own perspective. We have the capability to do that now, of streaming the actual interactive hologram into a virtual world, and then that can be experienced in social VR, for example. So we're actively working with a lot of these platforms to embed our playback engine so that our creative community, the users of DepthKit, can then stream or embed volumetric video holograms into those environments, and that opens up a huge channel of distribution.
It was just amazing to be part of this production. And I think one really important thing to highlight is, to the best of our knowledge, this was the first ever award show to use real-time volumetric capture, which was really awesome that we were able to do something so groundbreaking. The super exciting thing about working within the immersive tech space is all of these workflows, all these interaction paradigms, they're not yet written yet. And I think that that's what makes it most exciting, is we're really pioneering this whole new industry. And I think for us, for people that work in this space, it's ultimately our job to really think about what are the best ways that people are going to interact with each experience. If we make really fantastic experiences, we're going to make more consumers excited for the potential of this space, thus boosting its adoption and its growth. And that's really why we're all here, because we see that future, and it's our job in making sure that that future happens.
That was unforgettable, and we were there as part of the action.
And what a night it was. It's so great to hear how it all came together, and in their own voices too. I can honestly say that their work elevated our show and set a high bar for us and others. Julie, can you imagine what's next? It's so exciting to think of what's possible now.
Absolutely, and I can't wait until next year. Thanks so much for joining us, Ginna.
See ya, Julie.
Bye. Take care.